Hello and welcome. This is the Modern Dad Council. I have with me this week Erik Lehmann of the Game Changer Movement and J40 of the Greatness Zone. And I'm Chris Eischen of the Modern Dad Council, the Kick-Ass Dad podcast. And I also work with Jay in the Life Possibilities workshops and what have you. So this week I really wanted to take some time to focus on some of the work that Erik's doing. He runs the organization called the Game Changer Movement, or the Game Changer. Is that the organization, Erik? Maybe you can.
Sure, I can clarify that.
I mean, yeah.
Dream Catalyst is the organization that is the umbrella for the movement known as the Game Changer Movement. So it's like formerly known as Prince. So yeah.
Cool. And the whole purpose of the Game Changer Movement is to, well, I mean, right now it's to begin this conversation about, like, what kind of impact do violent video games have on our kids, on our society, and I think that expands even further into video games, like even into the movies and the culture that we live in here in the United States. So, and in other places around the world as well. But Erik, I wanted to give you a chance to highlight, why did you start the Game Changer Movement? How do people get involved? What is it, and expand from there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and this is sadly perfect timing because like 2.5 weeks ago we experienced yet another school shooting, right? And so thinking back almost almost 3 years ago. The shootings at Sandy Hook happened on December 14th, 2012, and as a father, I was blown away, and as a single parent, it was the first time I really needed to step up, and I was the first parent on duty that afternoon, and so in a pool of tears, I showed up picking my kids up from school, and I got to let them know what had just happened in the world. And what dawned on me, several months later, was that school, when I was a kid, was my asylum. School was my safe haven. School was the safest place that I could have ever gone to compared to everything else that was going on in my life. So it really rocked my world. And I mean, it wasn't the only school shooting that's happened, but it was just the most impactful in my heart. And so following, I'd say, I wouldn't call it a depression, but I would call it just a deep sadness, for about 2 months, just saying, what do we get to do with this? Like, how do we transform this, like, rock in my gut, this that's not going away anytime soon. And so I went deep into meditation, and I took all the kids from Sandy Hook into my heart, and then a vision showed up, and the vision was just creating a series of uplifting events where the ticket price was nothing besides a violent video game. So basically giving kids the opportunity to change their own game, to choose a better life for themselves. And then the next day I saw an image of the AIDS quilt. And so I said, well, okay, I get it. So, now once we have all these, discs, all these violent video games in our possession, what do we do with them? So what just showed up in my heart was time to transform them into art and something beautiful. And this way the world can see what transformation looks like firsthand. And so that's what originally, started the energy of the Game Changer Movement. And my beginning thought was to just inspire kids to do things other than play video games. And I was just like, I just wanted to build a huge network of alternatives, like Sky Zone, theme parks, all these different things. And then I learned that the theme parks were sponsored by the violent video game companies, and like it wasn't that clean. Like there was this pervasive understanding that, like, no matter where I looked, there was the influence of like violent media, um, and so what's recently transitioned into our deep focus now is to create a process by which we include youth and their parents in the development of an alternative gaming platform that teaches youth to do something other than kill.
So,
And
wait. I just want to back up real quick. So your original thought process was like, violent video games and everything are horrible and bad, and we just need to create a total alternative from video games in general. And then the reality of that was like too daunting, and so now your goal is refocused and on this movement, right? Am I following that right?
sure, I mean, I think other than too daunting, like I would say that it would just be different than meeting kids where they were, if that makes sense. So, I mean, I'm a networker. Like that's who I am and what I do. So it wasn't too daunting. It was just misplaced energy, if that makes sense. So, you know, would I have loved to rise to the challenge if I thought that that was the true answer? Sure. But what I learned over the past 2 years is that, or 2.5 years, is that kids are spending 10,000 hours between birth and age 21 in the gaming world, and that number isn't going down anytime soon. So then I thought, okay, if they're going to be there anyway, what do they get to expose their eyes and hearts to? And that's where the idea of changing the game, really comes into focus. And one of the things that I learned also about the violent video games, especially the first-person shooter games, is that many people focus on the shooter part of that expression. But what's really the most addictive is the first-person part. So how do we get kids to be the first person in their own lives? How do we give kids their sense of agency, their sense of significance, and so that they get to be the first person in something other than shooting? And I feel like that's what the huge opportunity is there. So there's a whole bunch of things at play because, in psychology, even in sales, when I was a pharmaceutical rep, which is not something I readily admit all the time, but when I learned that a provider was writing a product other than what I wanted them to write, instead of just calling that baby ugly, I would say, well, what do you like about it? I would meet them where they were, and so like that's the same philosophy that we're taking into the Game Changer movement. It's let's meet kids where they are, and right now they are predominantly in the virtual realm. They're on a screen in some way, shape, or form. And yes, it would be great to, and here's the opportunity, because what we want to do is actually we want to focus on the moment where we want to say we want to do what we call realifying the game world and gamifying the real world, because a lot of these shootings are happening because kids don't necessarily see the immediate difference between the virtual world and the real world, and that's where the line gets fuzzy, and that's where all these kind of shootings happen. It's from that zone of like, this isn't real, this is the game, and they just get themselves into the game poses, and then they commit these crimes that they hardly even know that they're committing. They don't have a sense that this is actually really happening until they're either dead or they've killed a lot of people. And so like, and here's the other big sea change. Like I'm an abundant person. I don't like, I'm about laws of attraction, and I don't like to speak the word violence. Like, because I feel like that's what we recreate when we speak it and give energy to it. And now I'm just I'm diving into the realism and saying, what? If we don't change, then everything like this is going to stay the same. And so we actually have to meet the reality where it is. And what we're learning right now is that we are teaching our kids how to kill. We are giving our kids the skills to do these crimes without the safeguards that the military or that the police training, facilities have. And so I just recently met a person on email named Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, and he's uniquely qualified to address this because he wrote this book called Stop Teaching Our Kids How to Kill. And basically, you can't get more blunt than that, right? So, and he's saying that, he believes that there's a time and place for guns. He's an advanced trainer, but that the kids should be nowhere near this technology, and this technology should be nowhere near the kids because literally there's just no safeguards. We're not even having the conversations with our kids that ask them, like, what are these games doing for you? Like, what do you like about these games? Like, when I witness a 12-year-old playing Grand Theft Auto, I snicker and say, like, is it that much fun to kill that many people that quickly? But I just feel like it's time to, instead of just saying no, like, don't do that, we need to say, I care about you, and let's make something else together. So, that's where the sense of agency and collaboration comes in, is that we can actually, we're going to create a retreat where we invite parents, youth and their parents, to create the next line of games together. And that's where agency starts. That's where kids know that they're significant right now. So.
That's cool. Jay, I'd like to kind of get you involved in this conversation a bit. What do you think about the game changer movement? What are some things that some added insight that you could add to this?
I think the biggest thing is the realization that you, Eric, do have to meet them where they are. They can't move from where they are until you help them see where they are, and then help them move from there. Excuse me, and that's something I didn't realize until fairly recently. You can say your grand vision, and it makes great sense for us who have done the work and have thought this for a long time, but most people haven't. And so to introduce this right away in a space other than where they are just means we don't connect. Eric, you brought up a couple of things that I thought were really important. A couple of really, I have three that I wrote down. The parent partnership is the big thing. that the ability to affect change can't happen with us directly trying to go to the kids in an environment that doesn't then support it. So where are the places of change that the parent and the kid need? And to me, that's the major initiative, is how are we rebuilding the parent-child collaboration about everything. About school, about respect, about work, about violence, about perspectives of every aspect of life. Two positive things, Eric, that came up for me when you were talking that I hadn't thought about before. One is that magic number of 10,000 hours. The Malcolm Gladwell's, if you're going to be an expert in something, it's because you've invested this amount of time, 10 years of 10,000 hours. So what do you really have for 10,000 hours of playing a violent video game? Other than a brain that really thinks that violence is the go-to default behavior. So how could we then realign that by offering a different kind of experience for those 10,000 hours? So I just wrote down here, what would it take to create a mindfulness, awareness, positive self-discovery and world discovery kind of major game? That over the 10,000 hours, you didn't even know it, but you became very self-aware and very world-aware. And no point in there, unless I guess you're part of the NRA, does it have to include, your arsenal of weapons. And I think in the absence of replacing that space that says it's right that everybody have a locker full of guns, that we start to show that the time that we spend with kids, or the time we spend as families, is around something really productive. And again, the hard part is how do we shift parent and kids the conversation, where many times parents are quite okay with whatever video game they're playing because it just gives the parent a moment of peace, to be more interactive and more connected about what's going on in those moments and who's the real babysitter here. So imagine if you could spend the 2 hours on the computer or on the game, but the game is bringing you to a heightened sense of awareness. Now, I'm not sure what that game would look like, but, you know, and it doesn't have any class or any attraction at the moment, calling it, you know, the game of attraction.
Right.
Which, you know, probably could, right? But I think in the shift of mindset, those are the three big things that Eric and I love what you're doing. The awareness of meeting people where they are, which means the conversation of kid and parent, that collaboration is something to redevelop.
Mm.
The 10,000 hours says you're investing in yourself as you're doing this. Is this a wise investment of your time? And if not, the same way you shouldn't go to college if the degree doesn't give you something intentional, then don't waste the investment. So how are you not wasting your 10,000 hours that somebody else with a greater, more intentional focus used the time to become an expert? How might we substitute that? So what if the games were around mindfulness and developing expertise around something other than, you know, shooting bad guys? So a huge discussion, and the beginning of a conversation that will probably get way more pushback than support, because it's just different, you know, right? Anytime you try and invent something to even in a better way, and you wonder how on earth would anybody push back on something that you know and they know would lead to something better. But it, you know, like we were talking about before, Chris, with your habits, you know, 95% of the time required to shift the habit is in the first moments of the habit, because it takes so much energy to get over the hill that in that process that most people don't commit to it. They just abdicate and say, well, I don't have time or I don't have something. And I think, you know, that just means that people like Seth Godin and some of the other ones who just have this amazing amount of resiliency not to give up on something that they feel or truly believe deep in their heart that this is a way of improving things rather than just selling something.
Yeah, I love that, Jay. Just thinking about like what you're talking about with me is like I'm going through this workshop right now. It's a 3-month workshop all about how to get focused on your goals. But there's like so much to do, it gets a little overwhelming, and so it's like, how do I get clear focus around that? And so I feel like with what, am I frozen again?
Nope, you're good on my side.
Nope. Oh, okay. I thought I froze up. So like I see what Eric's doing, and it's like it's been this growth process and this kind of learning. Like, okay, I know that I have a negative feeling around this. How do I, you know, find what's going on in the world and better equip myself to handle that as a parent, as a, you know, advocate, whatever it is, right? And so yeah, I think this is a really phenomenal way to say, okay, kids, you like these video games, so let's try and find, you know, a way to share all of these other things that are wonderful in life through that video game process. And I do that with my daughter when it comes to, you know, they have games out now that help her with her math and her reading and stuff like that. She's in first grade, so there's a lot of, like, I don't know, games associated with that. But my son, who's 14, like, you know, he doesn't want to play a letter game necessarily. But, you know, so it's kind of like, how do we dive into these practices that we need in life as adults, and as parents, you know, how do we equip our teenagers with that information beyond the video games or using a video game, right? So.
Yeah, well, if we would just go ahead, Eric.
Well, I feel like, you know, all this is the great refocuser of this energy, and so what I realized is recently is that I want to be the reason that there's no longer an adversarial relationship between parent and child, and how do we create that, how do we flip the script and say, why don't you just go play that game, instead of
go in your room and play that game,
right, and mean it, and actually want our kids to benefit from what that game is, and so maybe that's what we call it, that game, because I don't know, but anyway, I mean, but these 10,000 hours, they're so ripe and ready. Like, there's this conversation, there's these business platforms that are showing up, like Airbnb and Uber, that focus on excess capacity, right? So all of a sudden, where is our biggest excess capacity? It's in these hours, like 10,000 hours per youth. I mean, imagine, instead of just playing a game that helps someone even get to know themselves, imagine if they had a sense of agency in the world where they could literally, not just figuratively, not just in a virtualized environment, but they could provide answers to global questions as an 11-year-old, as a 12-year-old, and because it was a safe environment, because the next iteration is actually finding a way to pay kids to play these games now, and so in essence, figure out what the inherent value in solving some of these world challenges is, and then figuring out how to redistribute those resources. So, I mean, I know, like, scholarships are being handed out to gamers right now, people who are, sponsored and like, world-class gamers. And there are new games, like, kind of the math games, but also there are adult kinds of games called Fold It, which I don't know if we've spoken about before, but, like, it's a game that helps people learn how to fold proteins, that helped the scientific community learn, like, the next way to better understand how HIV works in the human body. And so there was this scientific question that was kind of scratching the heads of the entire, research community, and then one MIT professor created this 3D image of proteins and created a game called Fold It. 400,000 people played the game, and 3 weeks later there was a solution that helped the scientific community get to the next level to level up, towards the next answer or the next question. So, games are so powerful, and, like, I guess that's the whole point with this book, Stop Teaching Our Kids How to Kill. What could we teach them how to do? And, like, how could those 10,000 hours be applied in a way that, furthered some larger global mission? Because I think that's the other thing, is, like, how do we not just become self-aware, but how do we know our part in the greater world? And so that's what I'm really after, and I feel part of that, and this goes right back to the greatness zone, is like, what are you good at, what does the world want, and how can you get paid, in a way to do it. And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh, well, I know how to work with youth. I don't know how to design video games, but I know how to, like, do collective brainstorming, and I know how to invite, people who code to the table when it's time to code. So, instead of saying, do I need to start a game production company? Like, no, I just need to go with who I really am, and then, create around that. So who I am is someone who believes in building community. What's the next step in building that community? Invite parents and youth to the same room in collaboration rather than competition with each other, and re-instill that bond, and then go from there. And then the next retreat, we can invite, youth who code to the table to make this actually happen. And that's where a sense of significance really shows up. Is like, I made this game for the world. I contributed these lines of code to this game. Like, that's significant. That's agency. So I don't know. I'm just really excited, and I've had a lot of coffee.
There's a great quote that I think I brought up before, but it's just one of my favorites. It's Buckminster Fuller's question, and he asks, "What is it on the planet that needs doing that I know something about that probably won't happen unless I take responsibility for it?" Which to me, it kind of outlines also what the Greatness Zone thinks about and what entrepreneurs think about. How well do I know myself and my world that I can look at them and me and say, based on what moves me and what the world needs, here's where I should go. And that, I think that ability not only just helps direct our kids to what fits them, but imagine if they looked at the world and said, where is there a critical challenge or need or problem that for some reason I know something about that? How do I start a group of people who are committed to solving that? And think of the collective genius focused that way instead of some of the other ways that they focus. Eric, you made me think about one other thing. So I proposed something to a college who is really trying to get their school to have more of a college-to-life mindset. That you're here not to finish college, but you're here to prepare you honestly for showing up big to what comes next. One of the things that we've talked about is how do we build into their curriculum workplace skills and life skills? Because very few of them, students today, college students, and probably the same with parents, have any idea about managing their money, knowing how to buy a house, eating right, some of the things that we just presume we all know, but we don't, because a lot of the time we would have learned it, we've spent killing people from stealing cars. And so that time wasn't spent in a way that makes them more successful in the workplace, but rather less successful. So I wondered if some of the games could show up in the college environment that are apprenticeship games. That here's how you think you want to be a programmer, well then come and play this game and let's see if this is your thing. Or maybe the games are your way of saying, here's what's out in today's world. Play some of these to see which of these games won you over the most. Not that you could get the furthest, but did you notice how you felt as you were playing it? Did for some reason you couldn't wait to get back to it? And did you have some idea on how to navigate through it in a way that nobody else did? That might be for you. And now we have the ability of taking the method that this generation learns on, which is the gaming, technology and gaming, instead of fighting with it, saying, excuse me, the only thing it can deliver is violent video games, but now where is the shift in it to say, these are life games? This is how you learn about life in today's world. And in the past, your parents would walk along with you and show you things, take you on trips, and maybe we still do some of that. Excuse me. But the bigger part, there's a lot of self-discovery, or I should say there's a lot of discovery by self. That the games are helping you with awarenesses, but at the end of a game or at the end of something, could there be a way for you to journal about or track or understand who the you became at the end of doing this game? And what did it remind you, introduce you to, get you excited about? So if this did, then here are the next levels of this. And maybe, Eric, from our conversation before, maybe you just found your college. It's a series of these games that move you through the talented production or the talent building significant courseware that we call the game, but it's really nothing more than a course. Mm-hmm. And you stumbled on it because you didn't know you loved it and were good at it until you tried it, and then you realized there's 15 more levels. Mm-hmm. And now you spent your 10,000 hours and became an absolute world expert in it, ready to solve real-world stuff. And all you did was play your way to success.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's just beautiful. I mean, and I feel like that's, I mean, I don't want to get all conspiracy theory about it, but like, what if these games are here to distract us from our real purpose?
Yeah. Well, they are.
Right. So, I mean, like, and it's a way that the 1% gets more, and And so, like, what if we actually radically redistributed that, that set of resources?
Yep.
So, I mean, and I feel like that's a real big opportunity. Is that, what the Game Changer movement wants to do? It's creating this new category we're calling conscious disruption. Which is, how do we disrupt consulting? How do we disrupt education? And let's reframe education. Let's not call it education because that's broken. Let's call it learning modalities. We've now discovered that one of the most amazing learning modalities is the gaming environment.
Yeah.
So, if we can teach kids to kill, what else is available? And what other skill sets? It's just sad. I think what's important is to, touch on the reality of it. There was a youth involved in one of the shootings who didn't touch a real-life gun until the day before the shooting, and all of the rest of the training he did in the game world. So like with that knowledge, how do we flip that script and take that from horror to opportunity? Because like that's tragic. That's really sad to know. But and if we flip that and say, okay, here are 10,000 hours. Let's redirect them in a way that can really, really, disrupt college. I think that's, I have no problem visioning into Game Changer universities, and basically that's the pathway, is that, we can become accredited, much like, there's a game out there that's actually trying to get FDA approval for PTSD, so there's lots of, applications that are now starting to come out. I think the first opportunity is to unify them and to say, okay, instead of just sitting in our silos making this one-off game here, this one-off game there, let's bring a huge community of gamers together and concerned constituents together, stakeholders of every level, and create a collaborative process so that everybody has buy-in from the beginning. It's transparent. Everybody knows about it each step of the way. We're all looking forward to it, and because of that, because hundreds of thousands of people can get involved in the same project, and the technology has never been here in such a way before now. We can do this. Like, the platforms are here for, huge groups to do the same, to achieve the same goal. And so that's where I'm inspired, because, once I actually let go of my need to be the game developer, and I said, oh wait, there's way more qualified people than me to do that. But what do I do really well? I bring people together, I can hold a meeting, I can invite the right people to the table, and I know enough people, you guys included, to start that ball rolling. So, I think that's the real opportunity, and that's why, as sad as I am that another shooting took place, and, as sad as I am that the profile was ridiculously consistent with every other profile, which included a long set of training hours in the virtual gaming environment, violent virtual gaming environment. I don't know if you guys heard, but like one of the quotes that the most recent shooter said a day or so before he committed it was that this will probably be the only reason he would get on the news, because he feels so insignificant, that I'm so insignificant. And when I saw that quote, I was just like, I was saddened and validated in the same moment, because for the past 9 months I've been saying it's all about significance, it's all about significance. And so now, unfortunately or fortunately, there's a framework for it, and that's, it's true. It's true, because like we don't have a mechanism right now in the world to let our kids know how significant they are right now. I'm just kind of tangentially saying, like, think of ADHD. Think of all the kids that we're diagnosing with ADHD, and think of how they are with the gaming environment. They can play games for hours. These kids that we've diagnosed with ADHD. So it's not attention deficit. It's it's a modality challenge. It's not a diagnosis. I mean, for some it is. I don't want to disqualify the whole entire world of it, but we can really disrupt ADHD, by creating a game that matters, and and creating kids who know they matter, through how they perform in the game. And I think that's another huge opportunity. That's why, I mean, it's weird because I have this new sense of urgency, and I'm like, okay, we need to do it in good collective steps. So, yeah.
Well, this is, I don't know, it has nothing to do with what you're talking about specifically, but for my job, I literally had to create this process for how to get things accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I was actually going over it today. I'm like, wow, I'm building this process for my business, but I'm finding that it's applicable in all kinds of different areas of our lives.
Yeah.
And I think...
Okay, now you froze, Chris.
Yeah.
One of those games...
There it is. You froze for a second, Chris.
Oh, okay. Where'd I leave off? I was on a good roll.
Well, that's right. This is practical everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, so basically where Jay was talking about video games, and it brought to mind the game SimCity. And what I really liked about that is you have, in your city, you're designing a city, you've got to worry about sewage and water and, all of these things that you take into an account when you're designing a city. And it's like, wow, how could we actually develop a game that works with your finances, it works with, paying bills and things like that, right? So that it's real life applications that, now that you've got to sit there and do your taxes, this is just like that game I was playing called Doing Your Taxes, or whatever it is, right? But basically, like a game that kind of walks you through that same process, like that process that I created here for my company that I'm looking at now as, like, oh my gosh, there's so many other avenues in which this process is applicable. And so if we can teach that process and not wait till they're in college, not wait till they're, seniors in high school, but get them, start implementing these techniques at that grade level, like my daughter's in kindergarten and I'm coaching her through her homework and how to write, and it's like I'm trying to get her handwriting down pat now, because if I wait until she's in 8th grade to do it, it's going to be a lot more difficult of a process as opposed to doing the work at that younger age and then ingraining that that habit into her sooner. And I feel like as a parents, that's kind of our job, is to start implementing these thought processes and these techniques so that they don't become those insignificant kids, because they know where their voice is, they know how to stand up, they know how to show up, and that starts it starts at home. And there isn't much you can do about your kids when they leave the nest, but if you instill in them when they're here, this is how I show up, this is how I use my voice as a person that matters, and I don't need to go with a gun and go around shooting people and everything to get the attention.
Well, now you see why it's this collaborative agreement in this, parent or a parent partnership. And so to me, this growing sense of awareness, growing sense of consciousness throughout our world is introducing parents to better understanding what their real job is. It isn't to get kids to be little versions of themselves. It's to understand how to engage support, and guide and coach their kid into discovering what is best in them. And that the mindset for our kids can't be that we just drop them into a gaming school and they learn it that way. That every step of this, so Erik, wouldn't it be amazing just to get it done, but the slow and steady, where all the places we have to make change would be kind of a joint effort in introducing new things to kids at the same time we introduce new thinking to parents. Anything we do with kids, we always have to teach parents too. Otherwise, kids go back to an environment that doesn't support what they've just heard. It creates more problem than benefit. So I think, the idea of, the world is ready for this. And this awareness that sometimes you need these tragedies. It's horrible to say, but where's the benefit from and the blessing from these awful events? Is that we finally get realigned to where we should have been and where we have wandered off from. And it takes these, I don't know why we're like this, that we couldn't use our brains to see this is not productive. But we have to go through a tragedy to get our attention. We seem to move best from that. But that's back to support what you were talking about earlier, Erik. You have to meet people where they are. And if you really want somebody to change, then you have to catch them when they're in miserable pain about something, rather than they can be optimistic to see that there's something better. Now, I wish it were different. and all the stuff that I've tried to do with the Greatness Zone, saying, look, here's the opportunity to be great. And most people have said back to me, that's cool, but that's not for me. Today, right now, I'm worried about this. Help me with this, then maybe we'll talk. So the ability to take these shootings and say, see what happens when the parent-kid relationship isn't where it needs to be. See what happens when money matters more than progressive thinking and advancing these kids to show up big and solve the world's problems, so we all could create a bigger and better world. When those get realigned, then we have some momentum behind us and we can make this epic change. I know Australia pulled all their guns off when these kinds of events have happened, but they haven't done the next step that said, well, how do we then replace or redirect that really powerful thinking into really productive things? Like, here are the 10 problems our company or who out there has an idea. And think of the collective genius if we would throw some of the world's issues out there and connect it to the modality that people do best and say, play with this until you find us something to think about that we have not thought about before. So whether it's HIV or it's molecular structure or it's space or it's clean water, any one of these could come from our ability just to redefine how do we use our time in a way. In fact, I wrote down here productive significance. What is, that our kids are worried about being insignificant. Well, how do we not make them significant like you get on the news by killing people significant? But you must be productively significant. Come here and change something big for the world. Excuse me. Or whatever your definition of world is. It might be in this family. You're the person that pulls us all together. In this school, you're the person that saw the need for this, so that now there's a student lunch for kids who didn't have money. Whatever it is, that your definition of world can be any one of them that you want. So now I'm back to that great line, that great question from Buckminster Fuller. Where on the planet, or where in my family, or where in my community, or where in my school, is there something that needs to get done that I know something about that probably won't happen unless I go do it? Well, how are we setting you up to be able to see it, and how are we giving you the opportunity to practice so when it is your turn, you'll show up and do something big? I know, a lot of questions. I don't have the answers yet. Other than if somebody were to leave it up to us, I think we could probably create a pretty good roadmap. But
well, I think that's kind of the whole point of everything that you're talking about, Jay, is that it's not up to you to give us the answers. That's up to us as the individuals to kind of find that for ourselves. That my answer isn't necessarily your answer or Erik's answer. It's my answer. Because my unique talents, my unique passions, my unique values are what are going to create that vision, whatever it is, for myself. And then it's about, how can I surround, now that I know what my vision is, how can I surround myself with the support team to help me create that vision? And Eric, you spoke about that earlier, is that it's like my skill is bringing people together. My skill isn't necessarily coding, web pages design, or all those other things. It might not be your skill set, but you have the vision. You know what the pieces are that are needed to fulfill that vision. So how can you go out into the world and recruit other people with a similar vision as you, or that can align themselves with your vision, and that have the skills and everything necessary?
Can I ask a really big question, Chris and
absolutely.
Eric? So why is it that in our mind it's fair for our kids not to play these games? What is in the mind of those who do that will be the obstacle to changing this? So where is it in the mindset of the people who feel they must have an arsenal of weapons to feel safe, whether they live in the Wild West or they live in a city? How then, and where is the impetus behind a different view than the one that we have? Because the one that we have now says it is right that you do this because the world is dangerous. How do we find those people and start winning them into a view that it doesn't have to be like this? It doesn't have to be. That to me is the issue. That we have the same thing when we talk religions, that if you have a deep fundamental belief that you are right and they are wrong, where is there room to have a conversation that says we both get to be right? And so we may develop a mechanism and a process and the rest, but how do we bring in the thinking in a larger way to something that we seem to hold so dear, like violence is? I was watching, so I got this terrible cold today, so I was up all night watching the news, and it is nothing more than violent event after violent event. That is the recording of the...
What are the commercials?
Also that.
Well, I mean, they're for antidepressants. They're for anti-anxieties.
Here's how you handle that mean and nasty world of yours.
Right. So that's the whole point. Like, we are creating the world and then the treatment, So we are creating the symptom, and then we're selling the treatment for the symptom, So, and I like, this is the really interesting part, because so I've read this book called Abundance: The Future is Better Than You Think by Peter Diamandis, and one of the facts that they bring up is that we currently live in the most peaceful time that the world has ever experienced in history. Now, how is that statistic determined? By the murder rate, right? So here's where it gets confounded, and I only recently figured this out through reading Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill, which is more people are being shot than ever before. In fact, we are actually living in probably the most violent time that this world has ever experienced. However, the medical community and technology has saved the lives of the people who were shot. So here I am, pacifist among pacifists, saying, I don't get it. Why are we living, how is it that we are living in the most peaceful time our planet has ever experienced, and yet, all this fear is being propagated through the media, talking about, these murders, and, yes, the number of lives lost is down. That being said, here's what makes the statistic totally come to life. Aggravated assault has increased 5 times its level from 1970 until now. So like, if we look, and if this is the challenge, because like I studied research methods and program evaluation and planning, so like one of the reasons I got out of that racket is because I realized, and this is a perfect example, is like statistics are not facts, they're manipulations, and they're, they are, everything is up for interpretation, and it's just depending on who funds the trial is what brings it to light, So like the pharmaceutical industry, who pays for most of the commercials in the news, the news needs to be about violence and death and reasons that make us depressed in order to recreate the cycle. And the 1% doesn't necessarily care that they're recreating it, because they're living in a fortress that is, for the most part, taken care of. So I mean, that's the thinking that we get to change the game of. So I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of caffeine.
Well, that's fueling a really large message, Eric, and so keep the caffeine up.
Right. I mean, I think that's the other point is that it's, you know, I want to also speak to the technology end, is that it's not just the virtual environment. It's also like there's this not new, but this idea about the Internet of Things, right? So, you know, there's going to be sensors for everything. Our clothing is going to, you know, help us walk better. You know, all these different things that are going to, you know, be connected and tell us more about everything we already thought we already knew. So that's really what the Game Changer movement can be about. So we can create a line of sensors that can integrate with the gaming environment, that can create that real virtual moment. You know, and I think that's what the huge opportunity is, and that's where, you know, Silicon Valley is going to meet like the awareness world. You know, what do we need to be aware of from a sensor and sensory perspective that, you know, can help inform this next way of being. And so like I wanted to make sure that this, because it's a very powerful hour that we're in, you know, that was part of the equation, so that when people watch this, you know, they know what the magnitude is. Like, you know, when we amplify this to the platform that it gets to be, you know, there are huge opportunities, and the Internet of Things is the next big wave of technology. And with that, you know, what do we need to sense? What and how do we resensitize ourselves? You know, because like that's what, you know, they say these violent video games do, is desensitize ourselves. So how do we resensitize ourselves to what matters? And so I just wanted to make sure we got that.
I like that, Eric. What you made me think of is, you know, a house that needs the foundation rebuilt, but they're so busy decorating, you know, that it looks good, but it's going to fall apart. And I get the sense that in this, you know, Internet of Things, that we have all these things to make life better, but the fundamental belief systems aren't strong enough to support it. That we build all of these protective devices instead of using that energy to understand who we all are together. You know, that, so I know this is way different than this conversation, but if there were a discussion around religion, so that there was a peaceful approach to having things like that as a fundamental, that there were a care about basic needs of all people, that all of the tools that we build can work beautifully when those are in place. Otherwise, the tools that we build go to a few and the rest still suffer. And maybe that sounds too socialist, but the idea is, you know, in fact, tomorrow's blog is, or next week's blog is, to learn to be kinder, you have to look and see your face in the face of others. And if we could collectively change the tipping point, I guess is really what I'm looking for. Where's that thing down deep? That when we change that, all of the things that we add to it have this exponential impact, instead of these small little micro impacts that we do. So in anticipation of where our world is going, how do we not keep worrying about the frosting when we haven't made the cake yet? And where's the big thinking that needs to happen to make the cake before we waste all of our time, or use all of our time, you know, sitting there with a bowl of frosting and nothing to put it on? So again, to me, it's like most things, when we were calling out where's the issue, and inviting the world to say, well, where's my place to start talking about things that matter? And I think, Eric, your whole concept of game changer is remarkable, saying, you know, where we are is not where we need to be. So what are the first couple of things we collectively could do? How do we change from the inside out and start to incorporate some of the things that we now know that maybe we didn't know before? That could then, in fact, over time, create a new road to get some things done.
Well put.
Wow.
Thanks for being on.
It's like, well, with that said, we're going to wrap up today's show. Thanks, Jay. But we do have to go. I had to mute my mic because I have people mowing my grass, so it's kind of noisy. I don't know if you guys are getting that, but
A little bit. Sounds good though.
Okay.
The last time before
I
it
was
snows.
Yeah, hopefully they're getting all the leaves. Anyway, I got tired of dealing with it as the summer got progressed. We kept getting hit with all this rain, and it kept growing and growing, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm tired of mowing. But this has been a great episode to really showcase what the Game Changer movement is, and so if you want to become a part of the Game Changer movement, and work with Erik and help become a part of this community. Erik, why don't you take this next minute or so to kind of share how people can get a hold of you, how they can get involved, and all that.
Well, sure. I mean, I think this season, so we want to create an alternative for the holiday season of 2016. So this season, what we want you to do is consider making a contribution to the Game Changer movement, and we're going to be relaunching a new Indiegogo campaign or other crowdfunding platform campaign in order to make that possible, so that we can create alternatives. And so, right now the campaign is not yet live, but as soon as it is, we'll get that out to you. But I can be reached at the website is dream-catalyst.org, and my personal email is Erik, E-R-I-K, at dream-catalyst.org. And we're looking for time, talent, and treasure. So it's I only know what I know, and I know that I can bring people together. It's time to figure out who those people are and where we should meet for the first time. We can do a lot in the virtual world. We can also do a lot in the real world. And so if you have a suggestion as to where we can meet, and if you want to be an amazing host, you can do that. But just let's know that we've started the conversation and that I'm on it. This is definitely, as Bucky said, it's time to do what I know how to do and to apply it to the world that is ready for it. So with this most recent shooting, I feel more ready than I've ever felt before. So thank you for extending this episode to this conversation, because it really went everywhere it needed to go. So thank you.
No problem. Sorry about the noise, guys.
That'll be the sound effect for the first game.
Yeah. No, the blower going off. All right. Well, this has been the Modern Dad Council. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys all next week.
Awesome.